The blue lights flashed in Marcus Daniels' rearview mirror as he drove through downtown Oakmont, Georgia. He checked his speedometer, exactly 35 miles per hour in a 35 zone. He signaled and pulled over on Bradford Avenue, 3 blocks from City Hall, his hands immediately visible on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Through his side mirror, he watched Officer Brett Callahan approach with the swagger of someone who enjoyed this part of the job too much. The officer's hand rested on his service weapon, his eyes already narrowed with suspicion. "License and registration," Callahan demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. His tone dripped with contempt as he looked at Marcus through the window. "And keep your hands where I can see them." "Of course, officer," Marcus replied calmly, reaching slowly for his wallet. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" Callahan leaned down, his face twisted with barely concealed hostility. "You were driving while looking suspicious. That's reason enough in my city. Now shut up and hand over your papers before this gets ugly, boy." The word hung in the air like poison. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." Marcus Daniels had arrived in Oakmont, Georgia exactly 4 days ago, but he'd kept his presence deliberately quiet. The city council and Mayor Christine Anderson had hired him specifically to reform the Oakmont Police Department, which had been operating under a federal consent decree for the past 2 years due to a pattern of civil rights violations and excessive force complaints. His credentials were impeccable: 23 years in law enforcement, starting as a patrol officer in Chicago and rising through the ranks to become deputy chief in Detroit. He held a master's degree in criminal justice from Northwestern University and had completed the FBI National Academy. He'd successfully reformed 2 troubled departments, reducing complaints by over 60% while improving community relations and crime clearance rates. The Oakmont position was his first role as chief, and he'd accepted it knowing the challenge would be immense. The department had a reputation for aggressive policing that disproportionately targeted Black and Latino residents. Complaints of racial profiling, excessive force, and officer misconduct had plagued the department for years, culminating in a federal investigation and the forced resignation of the previous chief. Marcus had spent the past 4 days reviewing personnel files, complaint records, and use of force reports in preparation for his official start on Monday. What he'd found was deeply troubling: a pattern of misconduct concentrated among a core group of about 15 officers who seemed to operate with impunity, protected by a code of silence and weak disciplinary procedures. One name appeared repeatedly in the files: Officer Brett Callahan. 12 citizen complaints over 8 years, including 4 allegations of racial profiling, 3 excessive force complaints, and 2 accusations of falsifying reports. Yet Callahan had never received more than a written reprimand. His personnel file showed he was part of an informal group within the department that the previous administration had allowed to flourish, officers who saw themselves as the real cops keeping the city safe through aggressive tactics. The department didn't know Marcus had arrived early. He deliberately kept his presence quiet, wanting to observe the city and department without the artificial behavior that comes when everyone knows the new boss is watching. He'd been staying at a hotel under his personal name, driving his personal vehicle, a 5-year-old Honda Accord, and spending his evenings driving through different neighborhoods, getting a feel for the community he'd be serving. Today, he'd been on his way to City Hall for a private pre-start meeting with Mayor Anderson when the blue lights appeared behind him. He'd committed no traffic violation. He'd been especially careful to follow every rule precisely because he knew how police officers could be when they saw an unfamiliar black man in certain neighborhoods. But Officer Callahan had pulled him over anyway, and Marcus knew exactly why. In his wallet, alongside his driver's license, was his police commission card identifying him as Chief of Police, Oakmont Police Department. His official start wasn't until Monday, 3 days away, but the mayor had already issued his credentials and sworn him in during a private ceremony to handle the administrative requirements. Marcus had planned to introduce himself to the department on Monday morning during a formal gathering where he would outline his vision, expectations, and reform agenda. He'd prepared a careful speech about accountability, community trust, and professional standards. But Officer Callahan had just changed those plans dramatically. As Marcus slowly reached for his wallet, keeping his movements visible and non-threatening as he'd taught countless officers to expect from citizens during traffic stops, he made a decision. He could identify himself immediately, end this interaction before it escalated, and deal with Callahan through official channels later. Or he could let this play out, see exactly how far Callahan would take his misconduct, and document firsthand the kind of behavior that had led to federal intervention in his department. It was a risk. Traffic stops could turn violent quickly, especially with officers who had Callahan's history. But Marcus had been in law enforcement long enough to read situations, to assess threat levels, and to know when documentation of misconduct was worth the personal discomfort. Jessica Monroe, a local real estate agent, had pulled into a nearby parking space and was watching the traffic stop with concern. She'd lived in Oakmont her whole life and recognized the aggressive posture of OPD officers when they stopped black drivers. Something about this situation felt wrong to her, so she quietly pulled out her phone and began recording. Marcus handed over his driver's license, just his driver's license, and waited to see what Officer Brett Callahan would do next. The education was about to begin. Officer Brett Callahan had been with the Oakmont Police Department for 8 years, and in his mind, he was one of the best cops on the force. He'd made more arrests than almost anyone in his squad, had participated in dozens of high-profile cases, and wasn't afraid to be aggressive when the situation called for it, which, in his view, was most of the time. He looked at Marcus's driver's license with undisguised suspicion. Marcus Daniels. Chicago address. What are you doing in Oakmont, Mr. Daniels? I recently relocated here for work, Marcus replied evenly, his hands back on the steering wheel. Relocated for work, Callahan repeated mockingly. What kind of work? I'm in management, Marcus said, which was technically true. Callahan's expression hardened. Management. Right. He made the word sound like an accusation. Stay in the vehicle. I'm going to run your information. As Callahan walked back to his patrol car, his partner, Officer Steve Dalton, who had been standing by their vehicle, approached Callahan's window. Brett, this guy hasn't done anything wrong. Why'd you pull him over? Doesn't belong in this neighborhood, Callahan said, typing Marcus's information into his mobile data terminal. Probably stolen car, or he's coming from some drug deal. You know how they are. Dalton shifted uncomfortably. He was newer to the force, only 2 years in, and he'd learned quickly that questioning Callahan's methods was a fast way to become an outcast in the department. His car's pretty clean. Doesn't look like. I don't need you to tell me how to do my job, Callahan snapped. Just watch the vehicle and let me handle this. The license check came back clean, no warrants, no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. This should have been the end of the stop, a simple mistake that Callahan could apologize for and move on from. But Callahan wasn't ready to let it go. In his experience, guys like Marcus always had something to hide. You just had to push hard enough to find it. He returned to Marcus's window, his posture aggressive. Step out of the vehicle, Mr. Daniels. Officer, may I ask again why I was pulled over? Your system shows I have no warrants, no criminal record. I said step out of the vehicle. Callahan's hand moved back to his service weapon. Are you refusing a lawful order? Marcus maintained his calm, though internally he was documenting every procedural violation Callahan was committing. There was no legal justification for ordering him out of the vehicle for a simple traffic stop where no violation had been identified. I'm complying, officer, Marcus said, slowly opening his door and stepping out. At 6'2", he was slightly taller than Callahan, which seemed to aggravate the officer further. Turn around. Hands on the vehicle. Am I being detained? Am I under arrest? You're being uncooperative, that's what you're being, Callahan snarled. Now turn around before I make you turn around. From her parking spot, Jessica Monroe's phone continued recording. She'd seen OPD officers harass black drivers before, but something about this situation felt different. The driver was being completely compliant, speaking respectfully, and the officer was escalating for no apparent reason. Marcus turned and placed his hands on his vehicle, a position he'd been in perhaps twice in his entire life, both during training scenarios. The irony wasn't lost on him, the new chief of police being subjected to an unconstitutional search by one of his own officers. Callahan began patting him down roughly, more aggressive than necessary. "What have you got in your pockets? Any weapons? Any drugs?" "No, officer. Just my wallet and phone." Callahan pulled out Marcus's phone. "What are you hiding on here? Gang activity? Drug deals?" "That's my personal property, officer. You don't have probable cause to search my phone." "I've got probable cause to do whatever I want," Callahan shot back. "You're in my city now, and you'll learn real quick how things work here." Sergeant Paul Hutchinson's patrol car slowed as it passed the scene. He recognized Callahan's aggressive posture inside. This was the third questionable stop he'd seen Callahan make this month, and he knew he should intervene. But Hutchinson had learned years ago that challenging certain officers only brought trouble. He drove on, pretending he hadn't seen anything. "Empty your pockets," Callahan ordered. "Everything on the hood." Marcus complied, placing his keys, his wallet, and a receipt from a coffee shop on the hood of his car. Callahan grabbed the wallet and opened it, pulling out credit cards and examining each one suspiciously. "These cards all yours? Or did you steal them?" "They're mine, officer. Everything will match my name and ID." Callahan found a business card tucked into one of the wallet's sleeves. It was from the mayor's office, with a handwritten note, "Looking forward to Monday, Chief. Christine Anderson." Callahan stared at it, confused. "What's this?" "You know the mayor?" "I have an appointment with her office," Marcus said carefully. "An appointment?" Callahan laughed. "Right. Probably trying to file some bullshit complaint about police harassment. Is that what this is? You one of those cop-hater activists?" Officer Dalton stepped forward nervously. "Brett, maybe we should just..." "Go check his trunk," Callahan ordered. "I want to see what he's transporting." "You don't have probable cause to search my vehicle," Marcus stated firmly. "I've got reasonable suspicion that you're involved in criminal activity," Callahan countered. "That's all I need. Now pop the trunk or I'll pop it myself." This was it, the moment when Callahan crossed from questionable policing into clear constitutional violation. Marcus had given him multiple opportunities to end this professionally. Instead, the officer was doubling down on his misconduct. "Officer Callahan," Marcus said, his tone shifting slightly, "I'm going to give you one opportunity to stop what you're doing, apologize, and walk away from this situation." Callahan's face flushed red with anger. "Did you just threaten me?" "That's it, you're under arrest for obstruction and threatening a police officer." He grabbed Marcus's arm and spun him around, reaching for his handcuffs. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, buddy." From across the street, Jessica Monroe continued filming, her hands shaking. She'd witnessed OPD abuse before, but this felt different. The man being arrested was so calm, so controlled, like he was waiting for something. She had no idea she was recording the beginning of the biggest scandal in Oakmont Police Department history. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As Callahan snapped the handcuffs onto Marcus's wrists, tighter than necessary, his radio crackled to life. It was dispatch, and the timing couldn't have been worse for what was about to unfold. "All units, be advised. City Hall has requested a welfare check on Chief Marcus Daniels. He was expected at the mayor's office 30 minutes ago and hasn't arrived. Chief Daniels is a black male, approximately 6'2", driving a gray Honda Accord, license plate." The dispatcher read off the exact license plate number of the car Callahan had just stopped. Callahan froze, his hand still gripping Marcus's arm. Officer Dalton's face went pale. "Did she just say chief?" Dalton whispered. Callahan's mind raced. No, this couldn't be right. The new chief wasn't supposed to start until Monday. And there was no way this guy in the Honda Accord could be the chief of police. That was impossible. Shut up, Callahan hissed at Dalton. Just shut up and let me think. But before Callahan could process what was happening, Sergeant Hutchinson's voice came over the radio. Dispatch, this is Sergeant Hutchinson. I just passed Officer Callahan conducting a traffic stop on Bradford Avenue. The vehicle description matches. Can you confirm if that's Chief Daniels' personal vehicle? There was a pause, then dispatch responded, affirmative, Sergeant. That's the Chief's registered vehicle. We're trying to locate him now. Callahan's grip on Marcus's arm loosened slightly, but his pride wouldn't let him accept what was becoming obvious. This is some kind of mistake, he muttered. You're not, there's no way you're. Officer Callahan, Marcus said quietly, I suggest you remove these handcuffs now and we'll discuss this situation at the station. No, Callahan said, his voice rising defensively. No, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but I'm not falling for it. You're probably just some guy with a stolen ID or something. The real chief wouldn't be driving around in some beat-up Honda. Officer Dalton stepped forward, his voice urgent. Brett, dispatch just confirmed. I said shut up. Callahan turned on his partner. I'm the senior officer here, and I'm telling you this is not the police chief. Look at him. Does he look like a police chief to you? The racist implication hung in the air, caught clearly by Jessica Monroe's still recording phone. Within minutes, 3 more patrol cars arrived at the scene, drawn by the radio traffic. Among them was Captain Michael Torres, one of the few officers in the department with a reputation for integrity and professionalism. Torres approached quickly, taking in the scene, Marcus in handcuffs, Callahan's aggressive stance, the growing crowd of witnesses with their phones out. Brett, what the hell are you doing? Torres demanded. Captain, this guy was driving suspiciously. I conducted a lawful traffic stop and he became combative. I've been completely compliant, Captain Torres, Marcus interjected calmly. I've followed every instruction, answered every question, and informed Officer Callahan multiple times that this stop lacked legal justification. Torres looked at Marcus more carefully, recognition dawning in his eyes. He'd been part of the selection committee that had interviewed candidates for the chief position. He'd seen Marcus's photograph in the finalist materials. Oh my God, Torres breathed. Chief Daniels. Yes, Captain, Marcus confirmed. He's lying. Callahan insisted, but his voice had lost its certainty. He's just trying to get out of legitimate charges. I'm arresting him for obstruction, threatening an officer, and resisting. Brett, shut up, Torres ordered. That's an order. Shut your mouth right now. He pulled out his phone and quickly dialed a number. Mayor Anderson? This is Captain Torres. I found Chief Daniels. There's been an incident. A serious incident. You need to get down here now. Callahan's face cycled through emotions, confusion, denial, dawning horror, and finally, desperate calculation. His mind raced through the past 15 minutes, replaying every word he'd said, every action he'd taken. He'd called the new chief of police boy. He'd ordered him out of the vehicle without cause. He'd conducted an illegal search. He'd put him in handcuffs. And all of it had likely been witnessed and recorded by multiple people. Captain, Callahan tried again, this is obviously some kind of misunderstanding. I was just doing my job, following proper procedure. Brett, I'm going to give you one chance to stop talking, Torres said, his voice ice cold. Remove those handcuffs from Chief Daniels right now. Callahan's hands shook as he fumbled with his keys, unlocking the handcuffs. As they came off, Marcus rubbed his wrists, which showed red marks from how tightly Callahan had applied them. I'm sorry, sir, Torres said to Marcus, his voice thick with embarrassment. This should never have happened. Other officers who had arrived at the scene stood in shocked silence. Lieutenant Gary Zimmerman, who had been Callahan's defender in previous internal affairs investigations, looked like he wanted to disappear. Officer Nick Ramsey, who often partnered with Callahan on aggressive patrol, suddenly became very interested in examining his patrol car's tires. Deputy Chief Barbara Lewis arrived next, having heard the radio traffic from her office. She'd been serving as acting chief for the past 3 months, maintaining the department during the search for permanent leadership. She was a 30-year veteran who had tried to implement reforms but had been blocked by the old guard at every turn. When she saw Marcus in handcuffs, recently removed from handcuffs, her expression shifted from confusion to horror to barely controlled rage. "Someone better explain to me," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "why the new chief of police is standing on the side of the road after being placed in handcuffs by one of his own officers." Callahan opened his mouth to respond, but Torres cut him off. "Deputy Chief, I recommend Officer Callahan say nothing further without union representation present." "Oh, he'll have representation," Lewis said. "He'll have representation at his disciplinary hearing, his termination hearing, and probably his criminal trial if the chief decides to press charges." "Criminal trial?" Callahan's voice cracked. "For what? I was doing my job." Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Officer Callahan, you're relieved of duty effective immediately. Surrender your badge and service weapon to Deputy Chief Lewis. Captain Torres, please ensure Officer Callahan is escorted from the scene." "You can't do that," Callahan protested. "You're not even officially started yet." Marcus pulled out his wallet and removed his police commission card, holding it up for everyone to see. "I was sworn in 4 days ago, Officer Callahan. My official start date may be Monday, but I've been the chief of police of Oakmont for 96 hours. Which means for the past 96 hours, you've been my employee. And today, you just committed multiple constitutional violations, racial profiling, and official misconduct against your commanding officer." The color drained from Callahan's face as the full magnitude of his mistake became clear. Mayor Christine Anderson's car pulled up, and she stepped out, taking in the chaotic scene. When she saw Marcus, relief flooded her face, quickly followed by anger as she pieced together what had happened. "Chief Daniels, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mayor Anderson. Though I believe we need to move our meeting to a different time. I have a department to address." Callahan made one last desperate attempt. "This is all a mistake." "Chief, sir, if you'll just let me explain." Marcus turned to face him directly, and when he spoke, every officer present heard the steel in his voice. "Officer Callahan, you pulled me over without cause. You ordered me from my vehicle without justification. You conducted an illegal search. You placed me in handcuffs and falsely arrested me. And throughout this entire interaction, you called me boy, implied I was a criminal based solely on my appearance, and stated that you could do whatever you want because this is your city." He paused, letting that sink in. "This stopped being a mistake the moment you let your prejudice override your training and your oath. Now, surrender your badge and weapon. That's an order." After Callahan was escorted away by Captain Torres, still protesting his innocence and demanding union representation, Marcus stood on Bradford Avenue surrounded by half his new department. News of the incident was already spreading through police radio channels, and more officers were arriving, drawn by curiosity and disbelief. Deputy Chief Barbara Lewis approached Marcus, her expression a mixture of professional concern and barely suppressed satisfaction. She'd tried for months to discipline Callahan and his crew, only to be blocked by the previous chief and the powerful police union. "Chief, I apologize on behalf of the entire department," she began. "This is not how we wanted your tenure to start." Marcus held up a hand. "Deputy Chief Lewis, this is exactly how my tenure needed to start. I've spent 4 days reviewing complaint files, use of force reports, and internal affairs investigations." Officer Callahan's name appeared repeatedly, and yet he continued to patrol with minimal consequences. "Today, I experienced firsthand what dozens of citizens have been trying to tell this department for years." He turned to address the assembled officers, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "I know some of you are uncomfortable right now. You're wondering if I'm going to use this incident as a weapon against the entire department. You're worried about retaliation, about witch hunts, about being judged for the actions of one officer." Several officers shifted uncomfortably, But Marcus wasn't finished. Here's what I want you to understand. I didn't identify myself during that stop. I could have. Officer Callahan gave me multiple opportunities to pull out my credentials and end the interaction immediately. But I chose not to, and I'll tell you why. He paused, making eye contact with several officers. I wanted to see exactly what happened when a black man was pulled over in Oakmont for no reason. I wanted to experience what your citizens experience. And what I learned in those 15 minutes is that this department has a serious problem, one that goes beyond Officer Callahan. Jessica Monroe, still filming from across the street, captured every word. She'd decided to continue recording, sensing this was an important moment. 3 patrol cars passed this traffic stop while I was in handcuffs, Marcus continued. Sergeant Hutchinson, you slowed down, looked directly at this situation, and drove on. Officer Ramsey, you pulled into a parking lot 50 yards away, watched for 2 minutes, and left. Lieutenant Zimmerman, you saw what was happening and turned down a side street to avoid it. The 3 named officers looked like they wanted to sink into the pavement. That's not police work, Marcus said, his voice hardening. That's complicity. That's the code of silence that protects bad officers and destroys community trust. That's the culture that brought federal oversight to this department, and it ends today. Deputy Chief Lewis was nodding approvingly, while Captain Torres looked relieved that someone was finally saying what needed to be said. Officer Dalton, Marcus turned to Callahan's partner, who looked terrified. You questioned Callahan's decision to pull me over. You suggested there was no cause for the stop. You showed hesitation when he escalated the situation. But you didn't intervene, and you didn't report it. Why? Dalton stammered, Chief, I'm only 2 years on the force. Callahan is senior. I didn't think. You didn't think you had the authority to stop misconduct? Marcus interrupted. Officer Dalton, every police officer has not just the authority but the obligation to prevent constitutional violations. It doesn't matter if you're a rookie or a veteran. When you see something wrong, you stop it. He let that message sink in before continuing. I'm not going to fire you, Officer Dalton. But I am going to require you to complete additional training on duty to intervene, and you'll be partnered with Captain Torres for the next 6 months. You're going to learn what good policing looks like. Dalton nodded gratefully, clearly relieved not to be facing termination. Marcus pulled out his phone and began scrolling through the dozens of messages and missed calls that had accumulated during the traffic stop. There were calls from the mayor's office, the city manager, several city council members, and even a few from the media, who had somehow already gotten wind of the incident. Deputy Chief Lewis, I want you to call an all-hands meeting for tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. sharp. Every officer not on patrol is required to attend. No exceptions. Yes, sir, Lewis replied, already pulling out her phone. Captain Torres, I need you to pull every traffic stop report filed by Officer Callahan for the past 3 years. I want to see patterns, who he stopped, why he stopped them, what the outcomes were. Torres nodded. I'll have it on your desk by tonight. Lieutenant Zimmerman, Marcus turned to the man who had avoided the traffic stop. You're going to accompany me to the station now. We need to have a very serious conversation about leadership and accountability. Zimmerman's face went pale, but he nodded acceptance. As the crowd of officers began to disperse, Jessica Monroe finally stopped recording and approached cautiously. Chief Daniels. I'm Jessica Monroe. I recorded the entire traffic stop. I thought you might want the footage for your investigation. Marcus looked at her with genuine appreciation. Ms. Monroe, that footage might be the most valuable evidence in this case. Thank you for being a responsible citizen and documenting what happened. Chief, I've lived in Oakmont my whole life, Jessica said, her voice emotional. I've watched OPD harass black drivers for years. My nephew was beaten by police during a traffic stop 2 years ago, and nothing happened to the officers involved. Seeing what happened to you today, seeing you stand up and hold them accountable, it gives me hope that things might actually change. Marcus took her contact information and assured her that Internal Affairs would be in touch to obtain an official copy of her recording. As he finally drove toward the police station, now with a patrol car escort that felt more like an honor guard than security, Marcus reflected on the bizarre turn his first week had taken. He'd known the department had problems. He'd read the federal consent decree, studied the complaint patterns, and understood intellectually that reform would be difficult. But experiencing racial profiling firsthand, being handcuffed and humiliated by one of his own officers, had transformed his understanding from intellectual to visceral. He'd felt the powerlessness, the frustration, and the anger that countless Oakmont residents had experienced at the hands of officers who saw badges as permission to abuse rather than a commitment to serve. The question now was whether he could transform that experience into meaningful change, or whether the entrenched culture of the Oakmont Police Department would resist reform as it had for decades. His phone buzzed with a text from Mayor Anderson. "The city stands behind you, Chief. Whatever you need to clean up that department, you have my full support." Marcus smiled grimly. He was going to need that support, because what he was about to do would make him very unpopular with a significant portion of his own department. But popularity had never been his goal. Justice was. And in Oakmont, Georgia, justice had been absent for far too long. By the time Marcus arrived at Oakmont Police Department headquarters, word of the incident had spread through every level of the organization. Officers clustered in small groups, whispering urgently. Some looked worried, others angry, and a few appeared relieved that someone was finally confronting the department's problems. Marcus walked through the main entrance still wearing the same clothes from the traffic stop, the red marks on his wrists from Callahan's too tight handcuffs still visible. He wanted every officer to see exactly what their colleague had done. The building fell silent as he entered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Officers who had been laughing moments before went quiet. The dispatcher, an experienced woman named Carol Peters, looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and embarrassment. "Chief Daniels," she said softly, "your office is on the 3rd floor. Deputy Chief Lewis is waiting for you." Marcus nodded his thanks and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, he heard the explosion of conversation resume behind him, voices urgent, fearful, excited. Deputy Chief Lewis met him as he stepped off the elevator. "Chief, I've set up a conference room for you. Captain Torres is there with the files you requested. Internal Affairs Investigator Rachel Kim is standing by. And..." She hesitated. "Officer Callahan's union representative is demanding to speak with you immediately." "Tell the union rep I'll meet with him after I've reviewed the evidence and consulted with Internal Affairs," Marcus replied. "Officer Callahan can exercise his rights to representation, but he doesn't get to set my schedule." Lewis smiled slightly. "Yes, sir. I'll convey that message." In the conference room, Captain Torres had spread out 3 years of Callahan's traffic stop data across a long table. The pattern was immediately obvious even from a glance. Callahan stopped Black and Latino drivers at a rate 5 times higher than his peers, and those stops were twice as likely to result in searches, arrests, or use of force. How did this not trigger intervention? Marcus asked, studying the data. Torres's expression was grim. "It did, sir. I flagged it twice to the previous chief. Both times, I was told that Callahan was an aggressive officer who got results." The union backed him up, claiming his high arrest rate demonstrated his effectiveness. And when citizens complained, Internal Affairs investigations always concluded that Callahan had acted within policy. Rachel Kim, the Internal Affairs investigator, spoke up. "Chief, I want to be direct with you. The previous administration deliberately structured IA investigations to protect certain officers. Complaints were dismissed on technicalities. Witnesses were not properly interviewed. Video evidence was lost or deemed inconclusive. I've been trying to reform the process for 2 years, but I was overruled at every turn." Marcus turned to her. "Why didn't you go to the Federal Monitor?" "I did," Kim replied quietly. 3 times. But I'm one investigator in a department of 150 officers, and I was systematically undermined by command staff who saw accountability as a threat rather than a necessity." Marcus sat down heavily, the weight of the department's dysfunction settling on his shoulders. All right. Here's what we're going to do. Rachel, I want you to open formal investigations into every officer who witnessed my traffic stop and failed to intervene. I want to know why Sergeant Hutchinson, Officer Ramsey, and Lieutenant Zimmerman drove past an obvious case of officer misconduct without stopping it. Yes, sir, Kim said, already taking notes. Captain Torres, I want you to review all active cases involving Callahan's arrests or testimony. If his traffic stops were unconstitutional, then any evidence obtained from those stops is potentially inadmissible. The district attorney needs to be notified immediately. Torres nodded. That could affect dozens of prosecutions, sir. Then dozens of prosecutions will be affected, Marcus replied firmly. We don't get to build cases on constitutional violations just because it's convenient. If Callahan's arrests were unlawful, then we have an obligation to notify defense attorneys and the courts. The intercom buzzed. Deputy Chief Lewis's voice came through. Chief, I have Mayor Anderson on line 1, the city manager on line 2, and the president of the police union on line 3. They're all demanding to speak with you immediately. Marcus sighed. The political fallout was beginning. Tell the mayor I'll call her in 30 minutes. Tell the city manager I'll meet with him tomorrow morning. And tell the union president that I'll speak with him after I've completed my initial investigation, not before. There was a pause, then Lewis replied, Yes, sir. They're not going to like that. I'm sure they won't, Marcus agreed. But I'm the chief of police, not a politician. My job is to ensure this department follows the law and serves all citizens equitably. If that makes me unpopular, so be it. The Oakmont City Council chambers were packed beyond capacity. Every seat was filled, people lined the walls, and overflow crowds watched from screens set up in the hallway. News cameras from every major network in Georgia had set up positions around the room. What had started as a routine city council meeting had become a referendum on police accountability and racial justice. Marcus entered through a side door, and the room erupted. Some people applauded. Others shouted questions. A group of about 20 Oakmont police officers, sitting together in uniform as a show of solidarity, remained pointedly silent, their arms crossed in defiance. Mayor Christine Anderson gavelled the meeting to order. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to address the incident that occurred earlier today involving our new police chief, Marcus Daniels. Chief Daniels has agreed to provide a statement and answer questions. Chief, the floor is yours. Marcus approached the podium, and the room fell silent. He'd removed his jacket, and the red marks on his wrists from Callahan's handcuffs were clearly visible to everyone present. My name is Marcus Daniels, he began. I am the chief of police of Oakmont, Georgia. I was sworn into this position 4 days ago, and I officially start on Monday. Today, while driving to a meeting with Mayor Anderson, I was pulled over by Officer Brett Callahan of the Oakmont Police Department. He paused, letting the significance of that statement register. Officer Callahan pulled me over without cause. I was obeying all traffic laws, driving a properly registered vehicle, and I had committed no violation that would justify a traffic stop. When I asked why I was being detained, Officer Callahan told me I looked suspicious and that was reason enough in his city. Several people in the audience gasped. The police officers in uniform shifted uncomfortably. Officer Callahan ordered me out of my vehicle without legal justification. He conducted an illegal search of my person and my property. He called me boy and made several statements indicating that his actions were motivated by racial prejudice. And finally, he placed me in handcuffs and attempted to arrest me for obstruction and threatening an officer, charges that were completely fabricated. Marcus held up his wrists, showing the marks to the cameras. These are the physical reminders of what happened to me today. But I'm not here to talk about my injuries. I'm here to talk about the dozens, perhaps hundreds, of Oakmont citizens who have experienced similar treatment from OPD officers and had no recourse, no power to hold those officers accountable. He pulled out a thick folder and set it on the podium. This folder contains complaint records going back 5 years. Officer Callahan has been the subject of 12 formal complaints alleging racial profiling, excessive force, and official misconduct. Every single complaint was dismissed as unsubstantiated or not sustained by the previous administration's internal affairs process. The room erupted in angry shouts from community members who had filed those complaints. Mayor Anderson had to gavel for order repeatedly. But it's not just Officer Callahan, Marcus continued. My preliminary review has identified at least 8 other officers with similar patterns of misconduct, similar complaint histories, and similar protection from accountability. This is not one bad officer. This is a systemic failure of leadership, training, and oversight. One of the uniformed officers stood up. It was Lieutenant Zimmerman, the one who had avoided Marcus's traffic stop earlier. Chief Daniels, with all due respect, you're painting the entire department with a broad brush. Most of us are good officers trying to do a difficult job. Marcus looked at him directly. Lieutenant, you drove past my traffic stop this afternoon. You saw Officer Callahan with me in handcuffs. You knew something was wrong. And you kept driving. That's not good police work. That's complicity. Zimmerman's face reddened, and he sat down abruptly. I want to be clear about something, Marcus said, his voice rising with passion. I am not anti-police. I've been a police officer for 23 years. I believe in the nobility of this profession when it's done correctly, with integrity and respect for constitutional rights. But what's been happening in Oakmont is not good policing. It's the abuse of power, protected by a code of silence and enabled by weak leadership. Pastor David Green, a prominent community leader, stood up. Chief Daniels, my congregation has been complaining about OPD's treatment of black residents for a decade. We've filed complaints, we've met with previous chiefs, we've begged for change. Why should we believe this time will be different? Marcus met his eyes. Pastor Green, you shouldn't just believe me. You should hold me accountable. What I'm announcing tonight is not just disciplinary action against Officer Callahan. I'm announcing a complete overhaul of this department's policies, training, and accountability systems. He pulled out another document. Effective immediately, I'm implementing the following reforms. First, every OPD officer will be required to complete comprehensive training on constitutional policing, implicit bias, and duty to intervene. Second, I'm establishing a civilian review board with real investigative power and access to all department records. Third, I'm revising our use of force policies to prioritize de-escalation and sanctity of life. Fourth, I'm implementing an early warning system that will flag officers showing patterns of problematic behavior before those patterns result in civil rights violations. The uniformed officers were now openly hostile, several shaking their heads or whispering angrily to each other. Fifth, Marcus continued, I'm directing my Internal Affairs Division to reopen every complaint filed against Officer Callahan and the other officers I've identified as having problematic patterns. If those investigations reveal that arrests were unlawful or evidence was obtained through constitutional violations, I will personally notify the district attorney and recommend dismissal of those cases. The next morning's all-hands meeting at 6 a.m. was tense from the moment officers began filing into the department's training room. About 120 of the department's 150 officers attended, some because they supported reform, others because attendance was mandatory, and a few because they wanted to openly show their defiance. The 30 officers who didn't attend had called in sick in a coordinated action organized by the police union. It was a clear message: they were willing to create a staffing crisis rather than submit to Marcus's reforms. Marcus stood at the front of the room, flanked by Deputy Chief Lewis and Captain Torres. A large screen behind him displayed the OPD badge and motto: service, integrity, professionalism. Good morning, Marcus began. I know some of you would rather be anywhere else right now. I know some of you are angry about yesterday's events and the reforms I announced last night. And I know some of you are wondering if you'll even have jobs when this is all over. The room was silent, hostile energy radiating from certain sections. Before we go any further, I want you to watch something. He nodded to Rachel Kim, who started playing Jessica Monroe's video of the traffic stop on the large screen. For the next 15 minutes, the room watched in uncomfortable silence as Officer Callahan pulled over Marcus, escalated the situation without cause, conducted an illegal search, and eventually placed him in handcuffs. Every racial slur, every procedural violation, every moment of abuse was captured in high definition. When it ended, Marcus spoke. "This is what dozens of Oakmont citizens have experienced from officers in this department. The only difference is that this time, it happened to someone with the power to hold the officer accountable. But make no mistake, this is not an isolated incident. This is the result of a culture that has allowed, and in some cases encouraged, this behavior for years." Lieutenant Zimmerman stood up. "Chief, with all due respect, you've been here less than a week. You don't understand the reality of policing in Oakmont. This is a high-crime city. Sometimes we have to be aggressive to keep people safe." Marcus pulled up a new slide, crime statistics comparing Oakmont to similar-sized cities. "Lieutenant, Oakmont's crime rate is actually below average for cities of comparable size. Our violent crime rate has been declining for 5 years. But our complaint rate for police misconduct is 4 times higher than comparable departments. We don't have a crime problem that justifies aggressive policing. We have a police misconduct problem that's destroying community trust." He advanced to the next slide, showing racial disparity data and traffic stops. These are Officer Callahan's traffic stop statistics compared to department averages. Callahan stopped black drivers at 5 times the rate of his peers, with a hit rate, meaning actual contraband found, that was lower than average. He wasn't finding more crime. He was just stopping more black people. Several officers were shaking their heads, but others were paying attention, seeing the data for the first time. "Here's what else we found," Marcus continued, pulling up more slides. Callahan had 12 formal complaints over 8 years. But when we expanded our review, we found 37 informal complaints that were never properly documented or investigated. 37 times, citizens tried to report as misconduct and were turned away or told their complaints wouldn't be taken seriously. Rachel Kim stepped forward. "Chief, if I may add something. As the internal affairs investigator, I tried multiple times to properly investigate Officer Callahan and others like him. I was blocked by the previous administration. Files were lost. Witnesses were not interviewed. Video evidence was deemed inconclusive even when it clearly showed misconduct. The system was designed to protect bad officers, not hold them accountable." Officer Amy Richardson, a 10-year veteran with a reputation for community-oriented policing, stood up. "Chief Daniels, some of us have been trying to do this job the right way for years. We've watched officers like Callahan give the rest of us a bad name. We've reported concerns to supervisors and been told to mind our own business. Are your reforms going to actually change anything, or is this just another chief making promises that won't be kept?" Marcus met her eyes. "Officer Richardson, I can't change the past. But I can promise you this, under my leadership, doing the right thing will be rewarded, not punished. Officers who report misconduct will be protected. Officers who intervene to stop constitutional violations will be commended. And officers who abuse their authority will be terminated, regardless of their seniority or political connections." He pulled up another slide showing the 8 officers whose patterns mirrored Callahan's. "These officers are currently under investigation. Some of you know who they are. Some of you have worked with them, partnered with them, or looked the other way when they crossed lines. That ends today." "You can't fire everyone," someone shouted from the back. "You're right," Marcus agreed. "I can't fire everyone. But I don't need to. Most officers in this department are good people who want to do this job correctly. The problem is that a minority of officers, maybe 10 to 15%, have created a toxic culture that makes everyone look bad." He paused, looking around the room. "Here's what's going to happen. Every officer in this department will be retrained on constitutional policing, implicit bias, and duty to intervene. Those who embrace these standards and demonstrate they can police professionally will have long careers here. Those who can't or won't meet these standards will find other employment." Sergeant Hutchinson stood up. "Chief, I owe you and this department an apology. I drove past your traffic stop yesterday. I saw what was happening, and I didn't stop it because I was scared of being labeled a rat or facing retaliation from other officers. That was cowardice on my part, and it allowed a fellow officer to violate your rights. I'm sorry." The room buzzed with reaction. Some officers looked at Hutchinson with disgust. Others looked relieved that someone had finally said what they'd been thinking. Marcus nodded. "Sergeant Hutchinson, I appreciate your honesty. That took courage." 3 weeks later, Officer Brett Callahan's disciplinary hearing took place in a conference room at City Hall. Per union contract requirements, Callahan was entitled to a formal hearing before termination could be finalized. The proceeding was closed to the public but would be documented in detail for potential appeals. The hearing panel consisted of 3 members, Marcus as Chief of Police, Deputy Chief Barbara Lewis, and an independent arbitrator selected jointly by the city and the police union. Attorney Lisa Thornton, representing several citizens who had filed complaints against Callahan, was permitted to present victim impact statements. Callahan sat with his union attorney, Donald Fraser, looking diminished compared to the confident officer who had pulled Marcus over 3 weeks earlier. The weight of evidence against him, video footage, witness testimony, documented complaint patterns, and his own recorded statements, had clearly taken a toll. Marcus opened the hearing by presenting the evidence systematically. "Officer Callahan, you are here today facing termination for the following violations: racial profiling, conducting a traffic stop without reasonable suspicion, illegal search and seizure, false arrest, official misconduct, and violation of departmental policies regarding professional conduct." Rachel Kim presented the findings from her investigation. "In addition to the incident involving Chief Daniels, our investigation has uncovered a pattern of similar behavior spanning 8 years. We identified 37 documented instances of questionable traffic stops, 23 complaints of excessive force or discourtesy, and evidence that Officer Callahan deliberately targeted minority drivers." She pulled up traffic stop data. Officer Callahan's stop rate for black drivers was 487% higher than the departmental average. His search rate for black drivers was 312% higher than average. Yet his contraband hit rate, the percentage of searches that actually found illegal items, was 32% lower than average. This indicates Officer Callahan was not finding more crime. He was simply stopping and searching more black people without justification. Attorney Thornton presented victim impact statements. Keisha Williams, whose brother had been beaten and falsely arrested by Callahan 2 years earlier, testified about the devastating impact on her family. "My brother lost his job, his apartment, and his sense of security because of Officer Callahan's actions. Even after the charges were dropped, he couldn't find employment because of the arrest record. It destroyed his life." Another victim, Carlos Martinez, described being pulled over by Callahan while driving home from his job as a bank manager. "He asked me if the car was stolen. He asked if I was in a gang. He searched my vehicle and threw my belongings on the street. When I asked for his name and badge number, he threatened to arrest me for obstruction. I filed a complaint, but nothing happened. I lost faith that the system would protect me." The statements continued for hours. 17 victims testified about Callahan's misconduct, each story revealing a pattern of racial profiling, intimidation, and abuse of authority. Callahan's defense was weak. Fraser argued that his client had never been properly trained on implicit bias, that he was following the aggressive policing culture established by previous leadership, and that he deserved a second chance. "Officer Callahan is a product of the system that existed before Chief Daniels arrived," Fraser argued. "He was trained by senior officers who taught him these tactics. He was never disciplined for this behavior, so he had no reason to believe it was wrong. Terminating him now, for conduct that was previously tolerated, is unfair." Marcus responded directly. "Mr. Fraser, Officer Callahan received the same constitutional law training as every other officer. He took the same oath to uphold citizens' rights. The fact that previous leadership failed to hold him accountable doesn't excuse his conduct. And most importantly, Officer Callahan had 12 formal complaints filed against him. He knew his behavior was causing harm. He simply didn't care because he believed he was protected. The arbitrator, a retired judge named Helen Kowalski, asked Callahan directly, "Officer, do you acknowledge that your traffic stop of Chief Daniels was conducted without legal justification?" Callahan hesitated, then admitted, I made mistakes in judgment." "That's not what I asked. Did you have reasonable suspicion to stop Chief Daniels for a traffic violation?" "No, ma'am," Callahan finally said. "I didn't." "And when you called him boy and told him he looked suspicious, were those statements influenced by his race?" Callahan was silent for a long moment. "I don't think I'm racist. I don't know. Maybe I made assumptions I shouldn't have made." Judge Kowalski turned to Marcus. "Chief Daniels, you were the victim of Officer Callahan's misconduct. What outcome are you seeking?" Marcus had considered this question carefully. "Your Honor, I'm recommending Officer Callahan's termination for cause. His pattern of misconduct, combined with his violation of my civil rights and the rights of countless other citizens, demonstrates he's unfit to serve as a police officer. However, I'm also recommending that this case be used for training purposes, to show every officer in this department exactly what not to do and what the consequences will be." He paused. "I'm also recommending that the city establish a victim compensation fund using the proceeds from asset forfeitures. Every person who was victimized by Officer Callahan's unconstitutional conduct should have access to expungement of false arrest records and financial compensation for damages." Judge Kowalski deliberated for 30 minutes before rendering her decision. "After reviewing the evidence presented, I find that Officer Brett Callahan engaged in serious and repeated violations of departmental policy, professional standards, and constitutional law. The evidence of racial profiling is clear and convincing. The violation of Chief Daniels's civil rights is documented on video and undisputed." She looked at Callahan directly. "Officer Callahan, you took an oath to protect and serve all citizens equally. You violated that oath repeatedly. You abused the authority entrusted to you by the citizens of Oakmont. And when given multiple opportunities to correct your behavior, you continued your misconduct because you believed you were protected from consequences." Her voice hardened. "This panel unanimously affirms Chief Daniels's recommendation. Officer Brett Callahan, you are hereby terminated from the Oakmont Police Department, effective immediately." 6 months after the traffic stop that changed everything, Oakmont had become a case study in police reform. The transformation was far from complete, but the changes were undeniable and far-reaching. The most visible change was in the department's relationship with the community. Town halls that had previously drawn a dozen angry residents now attracted hundreds of engaged citizens. Community policing initiatives, once viewed with suspicion, were thriving. Crime reports from citizens had increased by 40%, not because crime was up, but because people finally trusted the police enough to report it. Marcus stood in the refurbished community room at OPD headquarters, addressing a crowd of citizens, officers, and city officials gathered for a 6-month progress report. "When I arrived in Oakmont," he began, "this department was under federal consent decree, facing dozens of lawsuits, and hemorrhaging community trust. Today, I can report that we've made significant progress, though we still have work to do." He pulled up a slide showing key metrics. Citizen complaints are down 63%. Use of force incidents are down 45%. Traffic stop racial disparities have decreased by 52%. And most importantly, our crime clearance rates are up 18% because citizens are cooperating with investigations. Deputy Chief Barbara Lewis added, "We've also seen internal cultural changes. Officers are reporting misconduct they witness instead of looking the other way. The duty to intervene policy has been activated 17 times, with officers stopping their colleagues from using excessive force or violating constitutional rights. That's 17 incidents that would have previously resulted in complaints or lawsuits." The Civilian Review Board, established in Marcus's first week, had reviewed 43 cases and made recommendations that led to policy changes, additional training, and in 3 cases, officer discipline. Pastor David Green, who served as the board's chair, addressed the crowd. 6 months ago, I stood in a city council meeting and asked Chief Daniels why we should believe this time would be different. Today, I can say with confidence that change is real. The review board has access to all department records. Our recommendations are taken seriously. And for the first time in decades, citizens feel heard when they raise concerns about police conduct. Jessica Monroe, whose video had documented Marcus's traffic stop, spoke about the community impact. I've lived in Oakmont my whole life. I've watched black families fear police encounters. I've seen young men pulled over for driving while black. But in the past 6 months, I've seen a transformation. Officers are engaging with the community, attending neighborhood meetings, and treating all citizens with respect. It's not perfect, but it's progress. Of the 8 officers initially identified with problematic patterns similar to Callahan's, 3 had been terminated, 2 had resigned rather than face disciplinary hearings, and 3 had completed intensive retraining and were being closely monitored. The message was clear: misconduct would no longer be tolerated. Officer Amy Richardson, who had questioned Marcus during the first all-hands meeting, had been promoted to sergeant and was now leading the department's community policing division. Chief Daniels gave officers like me permission to do police work the right way. We no longer have to choose between being good cops and being accepted by our colleagues. The culture has shifted toward professionalism and constitutional policing. The financial impact was significant as well. The city had spent $400,000 on training, new oversight systems, and the Civilian Review Board. But they had saved $2.1 million in reduced lawsuit settlements, lower insurance premiums, and avoided federal penalties. The Victim Compensation Fund had distributed $850,000 to 43 individuals who had been wrongfully arrested or had their rights violated by officers. Keisha Williams, whose brother had been victimized by Callahan, spoke emotionally about the fund's impact. My brother received compensation that helped him get back on his feet. But more importantly, Chief Daniels personally apologized on behalf of the department and helped him get his record expunged. That restoration of dignity meant more than any money could. Marcus concluded the presentation by acknowledging the challenges ahead. We've made real progress, but reform is not a destination, it's a continuous process. We will continue to evaluate our policies, listen to community feedback, and hold ourselves to the highest standards. The traffic stop that brought me to national attention was a wake-up call, not just for Oakmont, but for departments across the country. He paused, looking around the room at the diverse crowd of citizens and officers working together. What happened to me that day was wrong. But it created an opportunity to transform a broken system into one that serves all citizens with integrity and respect. That's the legacy I want for Oakmont, not that we had problems, but that we had the courage to fix them. As the meeting ended, a young black teenager approached Marcus nervously. "Chief Daniels, my name is Andre. I'm 17. 2 years ago, I was terrified every time I saw a police car. Now I'm thinking about becoming a police officer myself. Thank you for showing me that good policing is possible." Marcus shook his hand, feeling the weight and privilege of the moment. This was why he'd taken the job, endured the controversy, and fought through the resistance. Not for recognition or vindication, but for the possibility that young people like Andre could see law enforcement as a noble profession worthy of their talents. As he drove home that evening, passing Officer Richardson conducting a traffic stop with professionalism and respect, Marcus reflected on how a 15-minute encounter had reshaped an entire department and community. The red marks on his wrists had faded months ago. But the impact of that day would endure for generations, a reminder that justice delayed is justice denied, but justice delivered, even through painful circumstances, can transform everything. Oakmont still had work to do. But for the first time in decades, the city's police department was truly serving and protecting all its citizens. And somewhere, in departments across the country, other chiefs were watching Oakmont's transformation and wondering if similar change was possible in their communities. The answer, Marcus knew, was yes, if leaders had the courage to confront uncomfortable truths and the commitment to see reform through, regardless of the cost. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.